Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. So nice to have you all here for this webinar session. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Hannah Benson. I am a program manager here at the UP Center for Executive Education. I see some familiar faces. Hey, Emo. Hey, Prakash. Tim, I see you in there as well. Nice to see you all, and some new faces as well. So if you are able to put your camera on and be with us and have your camera on during the session, that would be great. Just adds a different level of engagement with the community. If you can't do that, that's okay as well. We understand that many of you are at work or doing other things as well. So the invitation is there. I wanted to kind of formally kick us off here. I think we've got people from all over the world joining us, which is not something that is strange for the University for Peace's Center for Executive Education courses. For those of you who don't know, we offer a lot of different courses around different themes that are geared towards helping people have a positive impact in the world. And what we noticed is that we've been offering these kind of free webinar sessions around really relevant topics recently, and we noticed there was a lot of interest in that. So we've specifically decided to start kind of a webinar series. During the next few months, we're going to be launching a few different webinars on different topics. Specifically, it's related to leadership. So it's the UP Center Leadership Webinar Series. So please, this is the first of about 4 that we'll be doing. So keep your eye out. Really excited about who we have joining us today. Julia, maybe I will hand it over to you to kick us off with her introduction.
Yes, hello everybody. Nice to see so many familiar faces. For anybody I have not met, I'm Julia Delafield. I'm the director of the Center for Executive Education, so always excited to be here. We get the chance to see this awesome content and share with amazing people, and then also, of course, get to know you guys better as well along the way. So I know it's right on the top of the hour, but we thought we would dive right in today because we have a full and fun session to share with you. We met Reshma because she's a member of the Amani Institute board. And for anybody who knows us well, the Amani Institute is a dear partner of ours. Basically, they run social innovation programs, and so do we, and we've managed to partner around them. So anybody who comes through the Amani family, we automatically think is pretty amazing. And that's how we met Reshma. And it only took a few conversations before we had invited her to become a coach within our Global Leadership and Social Innovation diploma programs. Our students within these diploma programs, they get to do coaching sessions as part of their program. And we realized quickly that she was going to bring both a deep awareness of leadership of the NGO social sector world, how to start your own organization, and also, she brings wonderful diversity, which, as Hannah was saying, anybody who knows our programs knows that we have people from all around the world in them. And so, of course, we want to have both faculty and coaches from all around the world as well. So to share a little bit more of her official biography, Reshma is Kenyan of Indian origin, but was born and grew up in Nairobi, where she's joining us today, in a safari family that had visitors from all around the world. So she was exposed to international things early. And she worked for many years in development and humanitarian aid, principally with CARE International, and then transitioned into a role as a leadership coach, facilitator, and consultant. And she launched her own company called Kenzo Consulting that works in this field. So today we're really excited to have her join us, and she's going to be talking about effective leadership in times of change. So Reshma, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great. Thank you so much, Julia. And thank you so much, Hannah. And so nice to see very many faces and names and some familiar faces. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are. My name is Reshma, and Julia, thank you so much for such a great introduction. I am Kenyan. I'm currently in Nairobi, where it's just past 6 p.m. And for those of you who may not know, we have a semi version of winter, so it's actually quite cold and cold in the bones. So if you wonder, if you see me trying to wrap myself, just know it's cold. So glad to be here with you. I'm so honored and grateful to be joining the Center for Executive Education as a coach, which has been fantastic. And also in this session, I am by no means the expert on leadership, but I'm hoping for the next little while we can just talk about leadership, what leadership means in a changing world, particularly in the last 2 or 3 years our world has completely turned upside down. We have found ourselves having to move to virtual remote spaces very quickly. And that has implications for how we show up as leaders and how we lead in our communities. So today is really hopefully as informal as can be. I would love to know while I kick off to just, if in the chat you could just put in your name and where you're joining us from, that would be great. And I'll actually start. I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to start, and hopefully this works, with a little Mentimeter poll. So if you can see the screen in front of you, just go to menti.com and use the code on your screen. That's 82645458. And in your view, there is no wrong answer. In your view, who is a leader? Who is a leader? What qualities does a leader have? I'd love for you to share. So just take a moment to do that.
You have.
Thank you.
Well, you have.
And while you're doing that, I see we have people from New York, but Australian, Costa Rica. I see some from Kenya. Thank you so much. Trinidad and Tobago, so great. Welcome. Jamaica, fantastic. And what I'm going to do, because sometimes Mentimeter is a bit slow, I'm going to actually stop sharing this screen and share the actual Mentimeter screen. So just keep typing in and I will, there we go. All righty. Anyone is a leader. Everyone is a leader. Absolutely. Each of us in our own right is a leader. Everyone, we all have a realm of influence. One who has served others, absolutely servant leadership, someone who influences others and has followers, people who care about others, someone who can be vulnerable and has the ability to motivate others, really be a role model, people with a sense of responsibility and accountability, set directions, encourage others to achieve vision. Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm seeing some really important things. First of all of us are leaders. Anyone can be a leader. People who have a vision, a true leader walks and leads by their example, sets directions, role models and influencers. Absolutely. Great. And in the last couple of years, and I know particularly for those of you who are part of the Center for Executive Education Programming, you're all leaders in your own right because you are role modeling innovative ideas and approaches and trying to change the world and fight for social justice. Great, thank you so much for that. So let's look at what the official definitions say. I mean, like I said, there is no wrong answer, no wrong definition, but the most commonly agreed is the capacity to establish direction, to influence and align others towards a common aim, to motivate and commit others to action, and to encourage them to feel responsible for their performance. Now, I just realized, can you still see my screen? Oh, I'm not sharing. Sorry about that. There we go. And I'll just pull back to that slide. So yeah, just to share, what you've all shared about leadership, ethical role modeling, absolutely. Ethical role modeling for social justice, ethical role modeling in a set of values and behaviors that support the change we want to see. And so, like I said, there's no commonly agreed definition, and so there's no wrong answer for who a leader is, but a leader really has the capacity to establish direction, to influence, to help others move towards a certain aim, a certain goal, to commit others and themselves, most importantly themselves, to action, and to really feel responsible for their performance, to hold oneself accountable as well as others. Newstrom and Davis also look at leadership as a leader style of providing direction, implementing plans, motivating, influential. There are many different kinds of leadership. We've heard of servant leadership. We've heard of leading from behind, leading from within, leading from the side. And so leadership really, if you think about it, is encompassed by a couple of key behaviors, key values. So we've heard around the issues of influence, of motivation, of ethical value systems, of social justice in today's world. And so the Work Foundation really has identified 10 key leadership behaviors that are valued in a leader. We've talked about motivation, enthusiasm, supporting other people, recognizing individual efforts, celebrating those around us, listening. One of the most critical things to really effective leadership is the ability to listen effectively, listen actively, and listen beyond just hearing. So listen with all our senses, really stepping to the space of empathy. And that's also the space of a really good, effective leader works really with a coaching style of leadership, really being there for an individual to support an individual's own transformation. Leaders provide direction, help demonstrate personal integrity. Practice what you preach, role modeling, encouraging teamwork, encouraging consultation. Decision making is really first based on, can we discuss this? Do I feel like my team's voice is heard? Particularly in today's world, when we talk about diversity, inclusion, a good leader really aims as much as possible to create a space where diverse voices can be heard and can feel like they're participating in decision making. A good leader actively encourages feedback and graciously takes that feedback and helps develop other people. So just thinking through individually as you reflect, how many of these do you think that you might have? Just thinking through, or what might you need to continue to build on? Yeah, and you don't necessarily need to answer it, but just thinking through how many of these behaviors might you see in yourself? And of course, along with leadership, we often hear the term management. And while some may believe that these are two very different styles of controlling people and controlling outcomes, actually, we realize, particularly in today's world, when we think about crises, when we think about working in the social impact sector, there are times when as leaders, we've had to step into a more managerial role. So that's more the controlling a group or set of entities, or controlling the ways in which things are done to accomplish a specific goal. And that's very much more task-oriented, where the leadership of an individual refers to an individual's ability to, again, influence, motivate, enable others to contribute towards the bigger organizational success. So really, when we think about leadership and management, we all need to, at some point, manage things as leaders. We, at some point, need to make hard decisions. We need to control the ability towards outcomes. However, having influence, being able to have a followership without forcing people to come along with you, being able to inspire people is what separates leaders and good leaders from just simply managers. So really, management is the circle of power. What can I hold power over? What can I hierarchically manage? And this is where a lot of structures and policies and procedures and organizational cultures that are built on superiority come from. And then what can I influence, even if I'm not necessarily the supervisor? What can I influence by bringing people along with me? So when you think about direction, a manager will really look at planning and budgeting, keeping an eye on the bottom line, whereas a leader will look at creating vision and strategy, really the bigger picture, keeping an eye on the horizon. Why are we doing this? What will this do for us? So really moving beyond just the details into the bigger picture and actually getting onto the balcony. However, you need, as a leader, as an individual, you sometimes need both of these roles. Sometimes you need to be in the space of planning, budgeting, keeping an eye on the bottom line. And so there is a balance. When we look at alignment and how we align teams, how we align structures to support our goals, Managers are really much more focused on organizing and staffing, directing and controlling, creating boundaries, so looking at hierarchical structure to make sure things are done efficiently, whereas the leader builds on that, but also creates shared culture, shared values, helps others grow, reduces the boundaries amongst the team, and also deliberately chooses to create space and deliberately makes or takes actions towards creating space for diverse voices to be heard. When we look at relationships, that's a really big indicator for what space am I acting in? Am I in the space of a leader, or am I in the space of a manager to just get things done? A manager will really focus on producing and selling, or focus on the task at hand, really based on a position of power, and often seen as a boss because things need to get done. Whereas when I step into the leadership space, this is where I can focus on people, I can inspire and motivate others, I can role model, and it's more about my personal power, my personal influence, not forcing people, not pushing people to go into a certain direction, but really bringing people along with me. And as I mentioned earlier, the leadership space is where much of the time, as a person who is overseeing the work with others or has direct reports, I'm acting with a coaching mindset, with a facilitator mindset. I know that the person in front of me, even if they're challenged in what they're doing, are creative, resourceful, and whole. So they have all the answers, and they are able to find solutions to the challenges. My role as a leader is to support them think through what are possible solutions to challenges by asking powerful, incisive questions. You know, tell me a little bit more about what would success look like? How might you do this? How have you seen this done in other spaces that might work? What are your thoughts on this process that we're having through change? And then when we think personally about personal qualities, some of us in the managerial role might keep an emotional distance, might be more at the technical expert level, might talk more, might want people to conform more to policies and procedures, and might have much more insight into the organization. So it's all about the organization and the structures and the procedures and the policies. Whereas when I step into the leadership space, this is really about looking at the human in front of me, recognizing that I am collaborating and co-creating whatever I'm co-creating with the human in front of me. And so really building that emotional connection, thinking with an open mind, allowing diverse voices, diverse opinions, diverse identities to be heard, and to start to have conversations and dialogue around that rather than just talking, really listening actively. You know, in today's world, one of the things that we have as humans, and this is scientifically proven, one of the things that we are really lacking or seem to not have the time for is independent thinking. Just think about it. When was the last time you spent 5 minutes doing nothing but just thinking? You didn't have a phone next to you. You didn't have a laptop next to you. By the way, there's a term for these now I just learned called digistraction. So you didn't have digistractions around you, but just purely thinking. And so as a leader, our role is really to support those we work with, to hold a space for them to independently think about anything, so that they can generatively think through solutions. And so that's what a leader does. We also look outside of the box, think about things differently. Leadership is really the space around where we think about innovation, thinking outside. How do we do this differently? Outside of our structures, what else works? I mean, the last 2 years, I can imagine that many companies have had to completely think differently about how to work all of a sudden. And what did that look like? Like, if I can no longer go to the office, I can no longer leave my house because of this pandemic, how else can I work outside of these structures? So really thinking outside of the box. And I think the last 2 years have been great experiences in building leadership. And ultimately, leadership is also about reckoning with the self. Who am I as a leader? What do I bring to the table? And as a leader, am I authentic? What does it look like for me to be authentic? Just want to check in. Are there any questions, any challenges, anything at this point? We will have a question and answer session at the end as well. But in the meantime, if there's anything, and thank you, I see some stuff in chat. I'm sorry for those, I thought I was sharing my screen, but I am seeing Laura, thank you, absolutely, co-creating. We're constantly co-creating every single day. And Julia, yes, digistractions, it's a great new term. So when we step back into thinking, okay, so what does authentic leadership require from me? The first is my self-awareness as a leader. Am I self-aware about my blind spots? Am I self-aware around how I work with the team? Am I aware enough to recognize that I'm either creating or not creating a space where those I work with can feel like they can voice their concerns? Am I aware enough to recognize when someone I work with, perhaps a direct report, needs me to be in a coaching or facilitation mindset? And on the balance of it, am I aware enough to recognize that it's important to consult, and at some point, hard decisions have to be made? And the insight into the self really speaks to our emotional intelligence, our EQ. So the self-awareness, the ability to understand yourself, to understand your strengths and weaknesses and how others see you. The ability to control yourself and think before you act. Today, in the world of 100 emails, often we get, all these emails, and sometimes some of those may frustrate us or create a very adverse emotional reaction. And our immediate reactionary response is to respond with whatever tone that may take on. It might be aggressive, it might come across as very directive and bossy. But as a leader, can we step back and just really think before we act, think before we respond to something? What can we do to support ourselves to take that moment to step back? Like I said, many of us don't actually spend time independently thinking about nothing at all. But if we were able to just step away for 5 minutes, walk away and think, okay, so what's going on here? What are my thoughts? What am I really thinking? And letting that flow, could we have a better response that really steps into the space of leadership? That I'm thinking, I might be checking in with someone else. I might be wanting to, rather than respond to the email immediately, pick up the phone and say, I'm here to listen. Tell me what's going on. Can we sort it out that way? And ultimately, the empathy that we have to hold as a leader is critical to being able to build a solid followership, particularly in times of change. The ability to understand other people's feelings and viewpoints, the ability to create space, even if you don't necessarily agree with someone else's viewpoints. Can we build a space where people feel like their voices are heard? Now, a simple way to do this, if you are either back in the office and you have a group of people you're working with, or you're virtually in a space together, many of us, depending on what cultures we come from, if we are having a discussion, many of us will react differently or respond differently to particularly discussion points. So the first is we might have diverse views in the room. How are we creating space for those? And when someone has a view that completely challenges us, do we make it very obvious on our faces that actually I completely don't agree with you? Or can we step back and say, I am listening and perhaps I see it in a different way. So what kind of language do we use as a leader? The other thing is, based on the cultures we come from. So I've grown up in Kenya, and growing up, even when I joined CARE International in my younger years, I was very shy to speak up because I felt like those from the global north had a power over me, were smarter people, had more to say, obviously studied in better schools than me. So I would not speak up in the room if we were a senior leadership team. And there are others who might come from a different part of the world who feel like they can jump in at every cue. As a leader, how do we hold a space such that those who are introverts, those who perhaps culturally would not necessarily speak up, we create a space where they feel comfortable and safe enough to speak up, and those who might speak too often and might be too dominant, that we create a space that they know they can still speak, but they have a bound time to speak and need to be really deliberate about what they're trying to say. So something we can use is either a virtual or physical circle or table, creating a space where every single person has the exact same amount of time, whether it's 1 minute or 1.5 minutes, to respond to something. Just that simple exercise with everyone else silent, everyone else not judging, not pushing back, not even challenging, so not allowing anyone to challenge just the thoughts that come up in that circle, completely shifts the creation of safety and trust in a team where those who feel like traditionally their voices are not heard can be heard. And Johan, absolutely, self-awareness is so forgotten often by leaders, even by us. Sometimes when power gets to our heads, we feel like we have earned the legitimacy to act in a certain way. So as leaders, the other thing that we need to be more deliberate about is what are we intending to communicate and how might that land? So as a leader, perhaps I have a follower, I have a direct report, I want to communicate with them in a certain way, and I haven't really thought through how I'm going to communicate, but maybe it's a really difficult, sensitive conversation. And I say it in a certain way thinking, look, it's the bare truth. It is the truth. This is what it is. And this is how I'm going to communicate it. And I just speak it as it is. In my own way, I'm blunt. So you have the second person who I'm speaking to. I just bluntly speak to them. So my intent is that I'm just going to speak to you and I'm your boss, I'm your manager, you need to know this. But that what happens is, so we intended to create this message and get it through, but it might land in a really different way. The impact of it might be felt in the gut. And you might have experienced a manager in the past who was quite harsh or didn't take the time to listen or would just come and tell you, this is the way it is. But stepping into with empathy, stepping into the space of the person you're communicating to, the space who is working with you, the space of, this is my superior. I might have cultural nuances that make me believe that this person is more powerful, or maybe I'm really scared of this person. The impact of our leadership and management on that person and the impact of our communication is something we really have to be self-aware about. Thinking again about cultures. Now, many of you probably are working with people in different cultures around the world. In some cultures, it might be quite appropriate to be quite blunt and, pushy and say, look, this is not done, this is the way it needs to be done, and et cetera, et cetera. But that in another culture might actually be quite insulting and quite degrading. So another realm of this is, as a leader, am I stepping away to think about the cultural nuances at play, particularly with various groups that I'm working with? And am I taking the time to listen, to understand, and to humbly step into that space? And it might be a space, particularly in today's globalized world where we're all working much more virtually than we have in the past. Can I really step into the space of humility and be vulnerable and talk about the things, we don't know what we don't know. And thank you so much, Lara. You said it, some people add vulnerability to the list. Absolutely. As an authentic leader, can I be open and vulnerable that I don't know, and that also perhaps I don't understand this culture, I don't understand the ways of working, but I'm here to listen and to understand. But being self-aware really is critical to this. Any questions? Any comments? Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing for a second. And if you can put on your videos, I'd like you to put on your videos because we're going to try something. So we're talking about a self-aware leader, a leader who is empathetic, a leader who really is influential and motivates and brings people along. And today we're talking about leadership and change, right? And of course, we know the past 2 years, but even prior to that, the world around us has changed so dramatically that those of us who are in leadership spaces, even those of us who are not in official leadership spaces, are asked to step into the space of being able to influence change and to influence people positively into a particular direction. And change is hard. We know that change is constant, but change is hard. And let's see if we can try and create some change. So if you're standing or you're sitting, whatever you're doing, I want you to cross your arms. Just cross your arms. That feels pretty natural, right? I want you to try and cross your arms again, but now whatever hand was on the bottom, I want you to try and put it on the top and see how much quicker you can do it. Is it harder? I see some people really struggling with trying to put hands on top. Is it hard? Was it hard to try and figure out which hand goes on top? Change is hard. Change is hard. And that's a great example of how change is hard. I mean, I still can't figure out which arm goes on top. It's still a bit of a twist for me. But change is hard. And in the last 2 years, we have had to literally change the way we do things overnight. And so change is constant, but change is necessary to remain relevant or to adapt. We all had to adapt. Come March 2020, we all had to figure out how we were going to continue to live and work. Change can be very uncomfortable. All of us have set ways of doing things. Organizations have set ways of doing things, but change can be really uncomfortable. For many years, I was actually the change management, well, not specialist, a coordinator for CARE International. And change was extremely uncomfortable. Emotions were heightened. There were a lot of things, if not done correctly, created divisions in teams. But also, change is not immediately seen. Actually, I think in the second year of my job, I had a finance director tell me, Reshma, I don't actually think you're doing your job because I don't see the change you've made. But that's the thing, change is everyone's responsibility, but it is uncomfortable and it takes time. And change management, particularly empathic leadership, and the ability to lead through change, according to Forbes last year, is the most critical leadership skill today. Now, none of us is the expert on change, but it is important for us as leaders to step into a space where we can be more agile, more adaptive, and support our teams, and really support our teams by being self-aware, but also being supportive and being able to allow people to come along with us. And absolutely, Lara, the quote about species that survives being the most capable of change. I mean, look at the last years, look at what COVID showed us, what we're capable of. So a leader does have very different roles in change processes, and these depend on what is needed. It could be that as a leader, I'm sponsoring change, I advocate and champion for change where needed, and really help keep the team focused on change. You know, really saying, okay, this is what we need, but also allowing different voices to be in and help the team continue to feel energized and move forward for change. A good leader will be a role model and will be willing to go first. Really, a leader in the space of change models behaviors and attitudes that are necessary for effective change and is very deliberate and self-aware. A good leader, particularly in times of change, is courageous enough to make hard decisions, of course, after consultation, but clear on the, the ultimate mission, the bigger picture, and also has the ability and steps into the bravery and the ability to say yes or no in order to best support effective change, even if that means that change might directly affect the leader. Oftentimes, we have heard of good leaders who have got themselves out of a job, but they were courageous enough to make that change because that was what was best for the organization. One of the things that a good leader has to do, and one of the downfalls of not doing this enough through changes, through change processes, is communication. Often personally, in my own experience, I have found that when there was not regular, transparent, consistent communication and consistent dialogue around what was happening with the change processes, whether that was various people's roles that were changing or departments changing or finances of the organization changing, when that was kept only at the higher levels, we often found that actually at the rest of the staff levels, people were completely disgruntled because they felt left out of the dark for this organization that they were giving their lives to. And it also felt like that impact picture. It felt like a hit in the gut because it felt like the most senior leaders were not being transparent in the change processes, and therefore it almost was perceived as if the senior leaders did not trust their teams enough to be able to even share that information. And so constant communication, and actually this is the one space where time and time again, I really find that if not done well, and often it's actually not, because communications is often the last thing thought of in some organizations, if not done consistently and regularly, this is where you start to get very dysfunctional teams. And right, people felt scared, confused, and unvalued. Absolutely. And then, you know, as a leader, we motivate teams, even in the hardest of times, get teams involved, get teams participating, show commitment and passion to change, celebrate and recognize successes. I mean, do we celebrate our teams enough? But also, we talked about this earlier, the ability to be vulnerable, to talk about failure. It's okay to have failed. Traditional management would never talk about failure because it's a weakness. How can you talk about failure? But actually, it's only when we talk about failure and when we expose that vulnerability are we able to open space to think through doing things differently. Some organizations, like for example, Amani Institute that Julia mentioned, I sit on the board of, actually pre-COVID had fail fairs every year. You know, let's come and talk about our failures and what does that teach us? It takes courage and bravery again to openly discuss failures, but see them as learning points. And it also allows us to really create team support. And finally, accountability. As a good leader in change, I must hold myself accountable. We must also hold people in the organization accountable. Can we agree on a joint accountability? Can we agree on distributed leadership? And really, it is scary, but sometimes being firm when needed and really fair and empathetic when needed. So these are the key leadership roles that we often see in change. And like I will say this, you know, and I can't say this enough, one of the key things that I often see in my experience, even in the last years, that has not been done enough of, is as leaders, as we are changing and pivoting, are we communicating enough? And I've seen a question in the chat around, based on my observations and research over the last 2 years, what irreversible changes have taken place amongst leaders? That's a great question. And I think it really depends on, you know, what is the bigger picture that leaders are aiming to do. What I will say is, I have seen many leaders who have moved from the manager space, being forced to move into the more empathetic space where I see the human in front of me, not just the role in front of me, because the last 2 years have shown us how fragile humanity is and how we all have human lives at the end of our day. And we've had to bring our work into our human lives. And so I've seen a lot of leaders move into that space of, can I be more empathetic? We're also seeing a lot of conversation around well-being and wellness, leaders being really strong advocates for well-being and wellness, because we know, particularly in the social impact sector, that burnout, because we feel like human lives are in our hands, that burnout leads to ineffective performance. And we know in the last 2 years, people having to work from home, plus educate their children in the front of a computer, plus having to cook, plus having to take care of sick family members. We know people have been burnt out and continued. So I see much more advocacy for well-being and wellness. And at the start, I wouldn't say we're quite there yet, but I'm starting to also see more open willingness to have conversations around issues of diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging. These are, in some parts of the world, we might see this differently to others, but I am starting to see people in leadership roles in particular spaces saying, even though this is making me extremely uncomfortable, because it is a change process, I think we need to start to have dialogue in the space. So those are some of the things that I'm seeing are starting to emerge that I hope are irreversible for leaders. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so as a leader in a change process, we're all going to have to step into these different roles depending on what is needed. And you might notice that, for example, decision-making and accountability might be more managerial, but still the bigger picture falls under our leadership and what we're pushing for vision. The other thing is, as individuals, as leaders, we all have our own identity as well. And that means whether it's, ethnic identity, or whether it's a diversity of nationality, whether it's a diversity of language, whether it's a diversity of the ways in which we work because of our education systems. The way we show up authentically as leaders will also speak, if we are authentic, very much to our identity and our diverse ways of working. We also have, each of us, a very separate blueprint for how our brain works. So our cognitive diversity. What does this mean? All of us, and I'm going to introduce you to a model. You don't need to remember all of this about the model though, but it's one of the models I use with teams particularly to think through how we work. So the whole brain model is really a model that helps us understand. So this was created in the 60s or 70s by a man called Ned Herman. He was at General Electric and he was a psychologist and an engineer. And he was really struggling with the fact that people were not working together cross-functionally, not communicating together cross-functionally. And he started to interrogate, with his scientific engineer background and psychology background and art background, how do people think? Does how they think affect how they show up with each other, and therefore how they show up as leaders? And so he was influenced very much by this idea of, our left and right brain looking into the science. So we might have often heard that those who are more right-brained are actually more creative, and those who are more left-brained are much more focused on the data and facts. Sometimes you may hear, like, I'm left-handed. Oh, you must be so much more right-brained because left-handed people are really creative. And so he was influenced by those models and started to think, is there something in the way we see and perceive information because of our genes, so what we have got from our families, but also because of nurture, our education systems in the countries we come from, or what we are exposed to in our lives, what hobbies we might have. Does that influence how we prefer to think, and therefore how we make decisions, and how ultimately we show up as leaders to other people who may not necessarily prefer to think in the same way? And so that's what led to the creation of the whole brain thinking model, which is just a common language that all of us have. Now, you don't need to know the last bit because it's very scientific, but all of us have these two parts of our brain unless we've been in a severely traumatic accident. All of us have these 4 quadrants of our brains that are interconnected. They do not work separately. So the blue part of our brain, that's really the left brain. That's a part that looks at really facts first. What's going on? I need the numbers. A leader who says, look, I don't want to know about the bigger picture. I don't want to know about the consultation. Often you'll see people in finance space like, just give me the numbers. What is the bottom line? I need to know the bottom line in order to make my decision. Some of us, then that's the most dominant way of thinking. Some of us might want to see the details. I really need to know the nitty-gritty of what is going on here. Or what does the policy and procedure say? Okay, we're going through a change process. In the past, what have we done? That's the green part, our green quadrant. And that's really the sort of safekeeping thinking, the structural thinking part, whereas the blue, the A, is very the analytical thinking part. All of us have this, but it's just that some of us have some areas that are more dominant than other areas. So this is what creates our thinking preferences. Some of us are really more relational in our thinking as leaders. As leaders, we step into the space of, no, I need to consult first. How are the people feeling? What about our clients? What about our staff first? And some of us are really more the experimental dominant thinking, what's the bigger picture here? Listen, I can't read the 21-page policy document, but why are we doing this? What is the bigger picture? So all of us have these 4 quadrants. Most of us tend to think, as our dominant styles of thinking, in 2 or more of these quadrants. Some of us, because of nurture or school, might be very single dominant or so strongly dominant in a particular way. So going back to, for example, the analytical way of thinking, just the numbers. It doesn't matter for me. I don't need to know about the consultations. I don't need to know about how people feel. Now think about that. That's someone who's probably much more a manager than a leader who's looking at the bigger picture, but is able to take decisions when required and also consults. So a good leader really starts to stretch into all these areas. Can I be analytical and just look at the numbers and the facts when needed? Can I look at the details and look at procedure and policy when needed, or think through the steps we need to take to get there? That's also the space of the steps. Can I communicate? Can I be regular? Can I think about my team? Can I think about our project participants or our beneficiaries or the ultimate clients? And can we do this differently? What is the bigger picture here? What are we trying to achieve? What is our vision for the organization for the next 10 years? So really, a good leader will start to stretch into all of these. And when you start to stretch into all of these, and you can feel free to take a picture of this, there's some basic questions that you can start to ask to help get people on board with change. So for example, if you're thinking, you have to be in the analytical space, what's the bottom line? What are the facts? What are the financial consequences? What is the logic behind this decision? What's the goal of the change? That's our analytical space. And if you find that's not actually a space where you have a strength, is there someone on your team who can really support you with that? Then when you think about the safekeeping and the policy self, is there a specific timeline? What are the specifics? What are the track records for this type of change? What has the past shown us? Are there references I can talk to? Where can I find the information? How can I minimize surprises? What are the risks to me? But also, how do I communicate? What will the communications plan look like? What will the steps in the plan look like? And then thinking about from the relational space, what will the impact be on my team and myself first? What are the implications for my customers? Who will be available to listen to my concerns? And can you engage with me personally before you get focused on the facts? And this is, if you know there's someone on your team who is highly relational, this is probably what they're thinking when you're saying, I'm going to lead this change process as the leader of the team. Are you able to answer each of these questions to make people who might think in these different ways really comfortable with where you're going towards for the change? And then those who might think bigger picture might be saying, how is this going to affect my future? And that's actually a question we often get in change processes, particularly in restructuring, downsizing, budget implications on teams. One of the first things people ask is, how is this going to affect my future? And that's probably one of the first answers you need to have, because people are worried, am I going to lose my job in a very volatile environment? Or how does this fit into the bigger picture for the organization? Or why are we doing this? I don't understand. I just need to understand. Or can I influence how this gets rolled out? Can I contribute to it? A good leader will say, yes, this is how we can create space for inclusive voice and inclusive participation. Or even, how might this constrain me? You know, I like thinking outside the box. I work in a particular way. Will this constrain me? So these are questions that are often asked by team members who are coming from a different lens of seeing the world. And when they are, you know, when they come across change, these are the questions you're most likely to get as a leader. So as a leader, can you think through, how do I respond to that? And of course, ultimately, underpinning all of this, it's constantly communicating. That's a lot of talking. Are there any questions? And I can stop sharing for a second so I can see people's faces and check the chat. Lara, what ways are effective at getting leaders to understand the importance of communication? So let's keep on drilling, but also examples, right? Really showing maybe examples from elsewhere in the organization or elsewhere where communication was done and change was effective versus where it was not done. One of the things that I think that you probably do have some form of it at the Center for Executive Education and other spaces like Amani, is storytelling for leadership and storytelling for change. That's really important. Like getting leaders to be able to tell the story of themselves and themselves in the change and why the change is important really helps bring people along, especially if it comes from the heart. So storytelling is a great skill to support leaders with, particularly in change processes. Thank you, Lara. Any questions, any challenges, any concerns?
Just to chime in, I would invite people to unmute themselves if you want to have a conversation
Yes,
too. You can always put stuff in
please
the
do.
chat box because that's an easy way to talk, but feel free to make it a live conversation too for the last couple of minutes.
Hello,
Hi, Yehuda.
how are you? I wanted to
Good.
ask I don't think I picked up, maybe you said it, change when it's a crisis mode. So the storytelling and the communications, it should be quite different, although, still communication is very important, or even more so during crisis. What pointers do you have for that type of communication, for example?
Absolutely. And that's a really great question. So we didn't directly mention it here, but in terms of crisis, of course, you don't have time for the storytelling, right? But as leaders who possibly are managing a very sensitive situation, I think one of the first things that is important is just letting the team know that something is going on. And perhaps there's sensitivities around not divulging too much information, but actually just saying, look, that we do understand. So actually, when I first started with CARE many years ago, until I left, I was overseeing communications and much of my time working in Somalia, Sudan, South Sudan, Yemen, Afghanistan, I actually spent a lot of time crisis communicating. And some of you may know, you may have heard that the Ethiopian Airlines crash in March 2019 that crashed on the way to Nairobi. We actually had a regional colleague who was on that flight. And I was tasked with communicating, right? And of course, there's some sensitivities around confirming whether she was on the flight because we didn't know what was going on. It was, complete blackout. We didn't know what the authorities were saying. But ultimately, what we realized is we had to communicate within 2 hours to our staff team that we are aware that there has been an accident and we are aware that we had a colleague on the flight. We don't know, we were very vulnerable and open to say we don't know much about what's going to happen next, but it's important that you all know. Compared to some previous incidences that were quite sensitive and we didn't say anything for 3 or 4 days, we actually found that staff were more willing to be open and say, we appreciate and just know we're here to help and we're here to work with you, rather than having hallway conversations to say, oh, by the way, they're not telling us anything, but I've heard this has happened, and creating these sort of rumor mills. We've had staff kidnaps that I've been involved in. And of course, those are very sensitive because you have to be really careful in how you communicate that so that you're not putting the safety of those staff in question, right? So, but I think what is important is as soon as you possibly can, as a leader, it's really important, whether that means an email, whether that means a quick conference call, whether that means you're on a WhatsApp group together, to say, just to let you all know, there is a situation, I can't tell you very much because of safety concerns or whatever, and we will keep you informed. I find a lot of teams trust that a lot more than not saying anything until you know the full bigger picture. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Danielle, I've seen if your leaders aren't self-aware and ignore issues, how do you even attempt to make representation? Such a great question and a hard one, right? Because leaders who aren't self-aware, I'm not sure they're actually quite leaders. They're perhaps managers. And that's a hard one. Feedback is a hard one. Sometimes you have to push, advocate from within in a big enough number to say, these are the things we're seeing. Some organizations may actually have anonymous feedback mechanisms or something you can do through HR or whatever else. It is best to use those methods, and when all else fails, really come together and say, as a team, we are feeling that this is something that is not happening, and look to the higher levels of a leader who will listen and who might be influential. And Dr. Lul, some people or some cultures, change is very difficult. It's similar what Danielle is saying. And how do you push them to change? Unless the one leader is in charge of the entire change process, those who are stubborn, and if change is happening, often you will find that people might not necessarily fit into that organization anymore, particularly when change is happening. So the stubbornness, all you can do is try through cultural awareness to have dialogue and to really create a space where you're trying to maybe have a mediator or an interlocutor. But ultimately, if there are people who are not, if the one person is not in charge of the entire change process, and it's very unlikely that the one manager or leader is in charge of the whole change process or is unwilling to, then they will find themselves out of the organization. But a lot of that, if you find that there's a bigger group within the organization that sees the need for change, it might be advocating and really collecting your energies within and influencing, because you're all leaders, using your leadership and in networks to influence particular individuals who can circle back and push for change in a different way. Any others? So Anna,
Go ahead. Yeah, there's a question.
I was just going to
from
say,
Anna.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think I'm going to share the deck with Julia and Hannah, and they'll share this out. And you can feel free to reach me on email in case you ever want more information.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll be sending out the recording of this session as well in case you want to go back and reference it. We have about 2 more minutes before the top of the hour. Any other, maybe we have time for one more question if there is one. We were good.
Lara.
So I've been thinking about this question a lot, and thank you so much, Reshma, for everything that you've shared. The one sort of thread of a question that's been going through my mind with everything starts from when you were talking about self-awareness. Something that I've seen in different parts of the world is that a lot of leaders think they have self-awareness. They think they know themselves well enough. Their teams don't feel that way. Their peers don't feel that way. But then getting these people to buy into, let's say, some coaching or any kind of support, because it's almost impossible because they don't believe that there's a problem, right? And the first step is admitting that there's a problem. And so what ends up happening is that their team and their peers will go to other colleagues for support that they should be getting from their leader. Have you found that there is a way to overcome this reluctance or to somehow shine the light on them? And these tend to be leaders who are who would be sort of more in the red, sort of very direct, very decisive. I'm never the problem. You're too sensitive. You didn't understand me. How can that be flipped? Because they are good leaders. They get things done. They just don't do it in a way that works for their teams.
Yeah, no, that's such a great question. And, you know, the hardest part is them being unable to see that if 50 people are saying there's a problem, there is a problem. In a few cases, I mean, often as a coach, I've worked with senior leaders and nonprofits who have been ultimately round the bend. Other leaders have gone to supervisors to say there is a problem here and this person needs coaching. Unfortunately, that's often what it's taken. And again, if a leader is not really self-aware and claims to be self-aware, and it's similar to leaders also saying, oh yeah, I'm totally, like I totally don't, you know, I don't discriminate, I have no biases. That's not true. All of us, every human has a bias or more. It's very hard to get them to step into that space of, okay, I see what you're saying, unless it comes from a superior, or in another way, if there's a way in some organizations through the performance reviews or 360 feedback that have really been the face to say, if we are all having a problem, can this go to a higher level? Maybe you have some allies who are peers of that person, or even higher, to say, can you really help us advocate for some sort of performance measures? And then really anonymously talk about what is the impact of this person's lack of self-awareness on the business, not on the individuals, but on the business. If there's a way you can put that together and take it away from this is people versus this person, but what is the impact on the business, that plus the performance review might start to do something. Although again, it comes back to whether the person will be willing to get into coaching. I had one person who was in that situation who came in and said, oh, I don't need a coach. I know there's nothing wrong with me. And so then you get into a really, really strange conversation.
Thank you very much.
No worries.
Excellent. Reshma, thank you so much for your time today. I know for so many of us here and for myself as well, there were so many aha moments when you were talking, when I could relate the content directly back to my own experience or to my own previous experiences in a work setting. So hugely grateful to you, to all of your expertise in bringing it to us this morning, this evening, or wherever you are. And to everyone, we will be following up with the slides, with the recording of the session, and with some more information on other leadership opportunities that the UP Center has. Thank you, Reshma. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and be on the lookout for the next webinar in this series as well.
Thank you all so much for allowing me into your space. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody. Have a good rest of your day or evening.
You too. Bye.
Bye, everyone.